How's it going, guys? Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel here. This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast, and today we've got a special topic. I'm going to talk about first dirt bike options. So I get this question a lot over my email. As if you want me to cover a topic here, a podcast topic, the best way for you to do that, or for you to communicate that to me, is over email. Email me, kyle@dirtbikechannel.com. You can also contact me on social media, although I'm not as responsive at the social media responses. Did I just say I'm not as responsive at the social media responses? I think I did. Anyway, you guys get what I'm trying to say here. The way to contact me is kyle@dirtbikechannel.com via email, and I will get back to you, and everyone will be super happy, and that makes the applause happen a lot when people are happy. So that's what you want to do. You want to contact me that way. So here today, we're going to talk about first dirt bike options because I get this question a lot. I have a lot of people that are coming into this sport that reach out to me. You know, they might be a 20-year-old person or they might be a 60-year-old person. And so I get this email enough that, in fact, I've had hundreds of these emails over the years. So I kind of have a response that is easy for me to use. It's a response that I wrote up years ago, and then I'll modify as needed. And so if you say, hey, what dirt bike should I use what dirt bike should I buy when I get into this, I have an email that I can just kind of tailor to you and send that out to you. And so some of you might have even gotten that email back from me. And I give you a lot of different bikes. In fact, how many different bikes do I put on here? And this is just something 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10 different bikes for you to look at. And whether or not you buy them new or used, it doesn't really matter because these bikes are still the bikes that I would suggest that you go look at if you're going to get into off-road dirt biking or trail riding or enduro riding, the type of riding that you see on my channel. So I'm going to give you 10 different bikes here, and I'm going to focus more on the race-oriented side of things. I give you 3 bikes that are more trail-oriented, and then there's 7 bikes here that are more race-oriented. So that's kind of how this works. I probably will put this podcast up on YouTube as well. The YouTube podcasts, some of them have done really well, and some of them have really been in the tank. So I've got to put a few more videos up there to see how many I want, or put a few more podcasts up on YouTube before I completely give up on that. But it's a lot more work to do the video podcast. So we'll just see how that goes. But anyway, so let's get into it. So for most adult men that are looking into getting into dirt biking, I would suggest either a 254 stroke or a 125/150 two-stroke. And I'll tell you why. Even a 200 two-stroke. The main reason for that is because I don't want people to get a bike that has too much power for them. Don't make the same mistake that I made. I got into this sport, and as a lot of you guys know, I bought a 450 motocross bike, and it was not the right bike for me, and it nearly killed my riding career because I wasn't having fun on it. The bike it felt heavy. It felt like a beast because it was a beast. It was a 2009 YZ125F. Awesome bike if you're going to do motocross and if you have like good skills and things like that. But not an awesome bike for me as a beginner. And so many people do that. You go down to the dealerships, and these dealerships they just sell the bike. They're like, hey, this is the hot bike. This is what Eli Tomac rides. This is what, whoever Ken Roxon rides, or Adam Cianciarulo, or whatever. Now that Adam Cianciarulo is on 450s just now. Anyway, they push you towards these big bikes, and especially if you're like a bigger person. Like if you weigh anything over 160, they're like, oh, you're gonna need this big bike to pull you around. You're gonna need a 450, especially if you're 200 pounds. I guarantee you that if you go walking into any dirt bike dealer across the nation and you weigh 200 pounds, they're going to tell you, oh, you wouldn't have enough power on a 254 stroke, or you wouldn't have enough power on a 125 two stroke. That is absolute garbage. That is not true. You will have plenty of power if you get a 254 stroke or a 125 or a 152 stroke, even a 202 stroke. You will have plenty of power unless you weigh, unless you're pushing 300 bills, I do not think your first bike should be anything bigger than a 252 stroke or a 254 stroke is what I was saying. Unless you're pushing, if you're getting close to that 300 bills mark, 300 pounds or below, anything below that, I think you can get away with a 254 stroke or a 125 two stroke. Now I am going to list a 300 two stroke down here as one of the possible first options, but it would be the last one on my list. And the reason why I'm going to list it here is because I know a lot of you guys are not going to listen to me. And so I want to give you, if you're not going to listen to me on don't getting something too big, at least I want to put you on something that isn't going to absolutely murder you, which would be a 454 stroke. So let's get into it right now. Here are the trail-oriented bikes. The more trail-oriented bikes that I think are really, really fantastic dirt bikes for you getting into this. Oh, and one other thing. Keep in mind that you're not married to this bike. So one of the problems that people have is I'm just kind of going at this as I go, kind of a little bit scatterbrained, but people tend to try to do so much research on this that they kind of paralyze themselves. And so they're doing all this research and there's all this information out there and there's like conflicting opinions and blah, blah, blah. And Kyle says this and this other guy says that. And my buddy says this. And I read 90 internet forums and they all said different things. Here's my suggestion to you. Yes, I want you to make an educated decision. And yes, I want you to be informed, but don't become over-informed and don't do so much research that you paralyze yourself from making a decision. Because here's the thing, you're going to have this bike on average for 2 to 4 years, okay? And then you're going to try something different. And it's not because you got the wrong bike to begin with, and it isn't even because you absolutely have maxed out the potential of the bike that you bought. It's just that you're going to want to try something new. Whether you buy new or used, you're going to want to try something new or try something different. And so you're going to have this bike for 2 to 4 years. So don't make the mistake of buying a bike that has too much power, because that will get you into trouble. Don't make the mistake of doing too much research and then not knowing what to do. I look at this as just like if you go to Best Buy or some of these big box stores to buy a big screen TV, you can do so much research when you're going to buy a TV that you just don't even know what to do. And you're staring at 30 TVs on the wall and you don't know which one, and you're like trying to nitpick between this one and that one. Here's the thing. Any of those TVs that you go there and buy, you bring those home and it's going to be better than the one you already have on the wall. So don't do too much research so that you paralyze yourself from making a decision, and know that you're probably going to have that TV you'll probably have longer than your dirt bike, in a lot of cases. So here's three of the more trail oriented bikes that I think are really, really good for an adult men to get into, to start looking for. Number one is a Honda CRF 250X. So this is a 4-stroke, right? And Honda's been making these bikes forever. Now, they haven't made a ton of updates to these bikes in a lot of years, but then here in 2019, I think they did make some changes to these bikes. And if I'm not mistaken, I think even they're fuel injected now in 2019. I could be wrong. I don't spend a ton of time looking at that line. I know forever they were a carbureted bike. Don't let that scare you, because those Honda CRF 250X bikes are bulletproof. They run forever and they're amazing. And if you could go out there and find one of these bikes you can find them for, by the time they depreciate down to about $3,000, they really kind of hold their value right there. And that's another point, is if you can wait till a bike depreciates down into $3,000 to $4,000 range, you can almost get one of those and not lose any money. Ride it for a year or two and only sell it for a couple $100 less than you bought it. And in some cases, you might actually be able to sell it for the exact same price that you bought it. One of my buddies, Logan, did that. He bought, I can't remember what year it was, but it was maybe like, I'll just call it a 2008 or 2009 Honda CRF 250X. He bought it for like $2,900, and he ended up selling it 6 months later for $3,100 or something. So he didn't make money on it because he had to put tires on it, and we put tubeless on it and stuff. But the point is, if you can get these bikes down around the $3,000, $3,500 range, you might not lose any money at all, or just very, very little when you go around to turn around and sell it. The Honda CRF 250X is not going to eat you for breakfast. It has good power. It can pull you up basically any hill Very, very, it's a very good bike. Very, very solid bike. If you like blue, let's talk about the Yamaha WR250F. So this is basically the counterpart for Honda on this bike, the WR250F. It's also a 4-stroke, 250 4-stroke. Has, the very similar engine characteristics to the Honda. It does have maybe a little bit better front forks. A lot of times people like the Yamaha front fork a little bit better, that Kayaba fork. And so both of those bikes are bulletproof options. Whether you like red, you bleed red, or you bleed blue, those are two very, very good options for a starter bike. And I cannot tell you how good those bikes are. If you're going to start out on something, find one of those used, or even buy them new. They still make them new. They haven't made a ton of changes to them, but again, Yamaha did make some changes to that WR in 2019, and it's an awesome bike now. I think in 2019, the WR is better than ever. I mean, it's better. They made a bunch of changes to that one and the 450 version of it, but again, I would steer you towards the 250 version unless you're like 300 pounds for starting out, for sure. Another more trail-oriented bike would be the Beta Xtrainer, okay? So this one is a 300cc two-stroke, but it's kind of a detuned two-stroke, right? And Beta's whole tagline is rideability. And so this is going to be an amazing bike. It'll have some higher-end components than the Honda and Yamaha that we already talked about, but it's going to be an incredible bike and both the Honda and the Yamaha and this Beta Xtrainer are going to have a little bit lower seat heights than some of the other bikes that we're going to talk about. The nice thing about that Beta is it's an Italian bike. If you don't know, it's going to be a little bit harder to find these. That's the only downside to the Beta Xtrainer is it's harder to find. But if you can find one, these things are awesome. It's got a gentle giant motor in there. It's going to have a ton of power. But not like overbearing too much power. And so that would be the trail. Those are my 3 trail-oriented bikes for you to look at. Honda CRF 250X, the Yamaha WR250F, or the Beta Xtrainer. It's a 302 stroke. So I gave you 2 4-strokes and then 2 4-strokes in there and then 1 2-stroke on those 3. Now, let's get into the more race-oriented. Now, I'm not saying that you have to race these bikes. I haven't done any, official racing. Of course, my buddies and I are racing each other all the time, but I haven't entered in any official races yet. But these are more race-oriented bikes, but they are also very good off-road bikes, trail bikes, enduro bikes. So number 1 on my list is a YZ125. It's a 2-stroke. Now, the reason why I have this one on here, it's a motocross bike, but the reason why I have it on here is because these suckers are a dime a dozen. You can find a YZ125 everywhere, and they're cheap. You can get them for cheap. Now, yes, it has a number of, deficiencies as far as for riding off road. It doesn't have the right gearing. It doesn't have the right rear tire, the rear wheel. It doesn't have a big fuel tank and all this stuff. It doesn't have a flywheel weight. But what it does have is availability. There's a lot of these bikes out there, and you're not gonna get into too much trouble with a YZ125 because it's got a really great front fork that can be kind of tuned. If you go to a suspension tuner, you can get the thing softened up, and it's a very predictable front fork, and the bike is bulletproof. It's a 2-stroke, and so you can rebuild that in your garage for under $200 if you need to. Rebuild the top end, put a piston and rings in it, and they're not complicated. There's a million of them out there. There's a ton of extra parts, like aftermarket parts for these things. So YZ125 2-stroke would be a great starter bike for getting in if you're an adult person and you want more of a race-oriented type of dirt bike. Next one on my list here for more race-oriented would be a KTM 150 or 200 XCW. These are also 2-strokes. These bikes are very good bikes. You can find them. Now, KTM stopped making the 200 in about 2017, so if you get a 2016 or older, you can find the KTM 200 XCW. That would probably be my choice. The newer ones, the KTM 150s, they're really great. In 2020, they've got it, TPI, fuel injected. So that would be a good one. These bikes will have the right type of gearing for off-road riding, and so that's good. They'll have the right rear wheels for them. They'll have great valving and great suspension for off-road riding. So that's what makes them really, really good. And and it's KTM, so it's got a bunch of premium components all throughout the bike. You can rebuild them easily in your, in your garage without a ton of, special tools. And so that would be a really good starter bike for being race oriented. You guys know how I feel about the KTMs. They put some really great components on them. And if you can find one of these things for not, too much money, you'll be doing really well. Next one on my list is the Beta 200RR. This is a 2-stroke. I highly, highly recommend this bike. I'm riding one and reviewing one right now. Beta has got one on loan to me, and this bike is really, really good. I can't think of, for a beginner, I cannot think of a better bike than this one as far as everything that it can do. It doesn't have so much power that it's going to kill you, but it has more low-end grunt than most of the other bikes on this list, either in the trail-oriented or the race-oriented, because it's got a great motor on it. Beta is doing a ton of good things with these 2-strokes. The only problem with this one is it's going to be harder to find because Beta doesn't make as many bikes. Same thing with the Xtrainer above. They don't make a ton of motorcycles. It's an Italian company. It's got a lower seat height than basically all of the other bikes that I'm listing out in the race category. The more race-oriented bikes, this Beta will have a lower seat height than any of the other bikes that I'm going over. So that's nice. The Beta feels more like about a 7/8 of a full-size dirt bike. So if you say a full-size dirt bike is like, 1, the Beta 200 and all the Betas for that matter, they feel like they're about 7/8 of a dirt bike. So it's a pretty cool thing. And the more I like it, the more I ride them, the more I like them. This 200 Beta 200RR that I'm riding is really good. There's only one problem that I have with the bike, and that's the limited steering. But I don't think as a beginner it's going to be a big deal to you because you're not going to go in some of the tight technical areas that I'm going, and so you probably would never even notice. In fact, 2 years ago, it's highly probable that the Beta that I rode 2 years ago, the 2-stroke that I rode 2 years ago, I didn't even notice the steering thing because I wasn't taking the bike in super technical places. And so that's the only downer on that, but I highly, highly recommend the Beta 200RR as a beginner bike in the more race-oriented category. Next one up on my list is a 4-stroke, okay? So I've given you 3 of the 2-strokes, and now I'm going to do one 4-stroke here. Three 4-strokes in a row. It's the Yamaha YZ125F. So this is a 4-stroke. Yamaha started making these in like 2015, 2016. It's an off-road enduro version. It's a race bike. I mean, basically, if you took the WR250F, this is its big brother as far as like the one that you can push harder, the one that's more made for racing, GNCC style racing, desert racing. This YZ250FX is a beast, man. It has got a fantastic motor. I think of the KTMs that I have paired it up against, I feel like the Yamaha has had a little bit more pull on the motor. So it's an awesome bike. It's got a wide ratio transmission similar to like the KTM XEW line, if you're familiar with that. So it's got a really low first gear, great front forks, second gear, third gear. They're spaced out. There's 6 speeds on that bike, and it's very good. If you went out there and you got a YZ250FX for your first bike, it's a lot of bike. It's a bike that wants you to push it hard. It's very snappy on the low end. When you're in first gear, if you ride it around your lawn very much, you're going to tear your lawn out because it's so responsive in first gear that it just tries to tear your grass out. There's no other way to say it. I put my dad on the YZ250FX, and it was a little bit too snappy for him. He preferred some of the other bikes, but I do think it's a really, really good bike to start out on. And I know guys that are better riders than me that are still riding this bike. So that's one thing I want to say here is just because I'm saying that these are beginner bikes doesn't mean that they're good beginner bikes. It doesn't mean that they're not good bikes for a trained professional or whatever, because I've literally all of these bikes on this list. I have ridden with guys that own these things and ride them who are much better riders than me. Like a YZ125. I know guys that ride these things and they're better riders than me, riding for longer than me. So it isn't just that this is a beginner bike. It's just that these happen to be good bikes for beginners, which is kind of a weird thing, but hopefully you're tracking with me on there. So YZ250FX will be a fantastic first bike if you're gonna want to do a more race oriented 4-stroke. Next one on my list is the KTM 250 XCF. This is also a 4-stroke. I would say that it is my favorite KTM 4-stroke of anything that they've got in their line. I love the KTM 250 XCFs because they just deliver power in such a way that is very predictable. It isn't in your face, but you can put the power to the ground and just go. They just go, and they're awesome. And the way that they handle, I'm not sure there's a better handling dirt bike in the KTM lineup than the KTM 250 XCF. As far as for cornering, it has the right balance of stability, but also nimbleness to it. There are times when you're riding a 250 XCF and it just makes you feel like a hero when you're trying to do cornering. And I'm not a great cornering guy, blah, 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 blah. But I'm telling you, that bike is very hard to beat for the performance of what it does, how good it makes you feel when you're riding that bike. It's awesome. I would also say, though, this is not a good bike for a rider who wants to ride slow. This is probably the most difficult overall bike to ride on this list. And I say that because it likes to be pushed hard. It doesn't have a ton of low end grunt. And so this bike works the harder you push it. And so if you're going to be a slower rider, maybe if you're, a little bit older or something, a little bit more conservative, this is not the bike that I would suggest for you because it wants to be pushed hard. And it does better the harder you push on this thing. So that's one of the things about these more race-oriented bikes is they want to be pushed hard, and they do better as you push them harder and harder. And the KTM 250 XCF is probably the most like that on this list. So good starter bike there, KTM 250 XCF, but maybe the hardest one on my list if you're going to start out with that. Here's one that is kind of an anomaly on there. It's another 4-stroke, and it's the Beta 390RR. So it's kind of bucking the trend here because these last two bikes are bucking the trend a little bit because I say, let's get you these smaller bore bikes. The Beta 390RR, because Beta does some different things with their bikes, it's got a little bit lower seat height, and this bike is the epitome of a gentle giant. The Beta 390RR is a 4-stroke, but it's very forgiving. It is probably the most forgiving 4-stroke, like performance 4-stroke that I've ever been on. Is it as forgiving as the Honda, the trail-oriented bikes? No, it's not. So the Honda CRF 250X and the Yamaha WR250F and the Beta Xtrainer are going to be more forgiving than this one. But here is a bike that is like an off-road enduro racing bike, and it is very forgiving. It's the biggest motor that I would suggest you get as a first bike, and I only put this on here after I rode the thing and reviewed the thing because it was so freaking good that I was like, wow, this one could be a first bike. The one caveat that I would say is it might be better to get a Beta 390RR if it's your second bike, or maybe you've got some experience before. Maybe you've ridden street bikes for a long time, but you don't have a lot of experience on the dirt bikes. That might be where the Beta is for you. Because you've already got you know how to brake, you know how to corner, maybe, or I shouldn't say corner, you know how to ride, you know how to use a clutch. Maybe you've had a street bike before and you just want to get into dirt bikes. The Beta 390RR has more power than most of the bikes on this list, but it's forgiving. And so it's just kind of this anomaly out there where I think that a lot of riders could start out on a Beta 390RR because it's just so awesome. It's so forgiving. It doesn't try to bite you like a 450 4-stroke. Those ones try to bite your head off. This is better than a 350, like a KTM 350. I would take the Beta 390 over a KTM 350, especially for a newer rider. I don't like the KTM 350 for a new rider, but the Beta 390, I do. It's awesome. The last one on my list here, and the reason why I suggest this one, it isn't because I think it's a great beginner bike. It's because so many people are just going to go out there and do this anyway, so I may as well talk about it. And it's a KTM 300 XCW. This bike is too much for most beginning riders. I'm just going to say it right there. I'm going to go on record and say I'm not saying this is a good bike for everyone. But if you're a little bit heavier, like if you're pushing 300 pounds, this bike is probably going to be a good bike for you. And this is a bike that you would never, ever, ever outgrow. Let me say that again. No one listening to this podcast is ever going to outgrow the capability of a KTM 300 XCW. You're just not. It is more capable than any of us are going to be ever for our bikes. That is one benefit of this, is because if you started on that bike and if you were careful and you didn't push it too hard and you used your brain, you may never need another bike. You know what I mean? And so that's a good thing with the KTM 300 XCW. This was my second bike. And I know I started out with the wrong bike, and then I got onto this bike, and the KTM 300 XCW was a 2012. It changed my life. The only reason that we are having this conversation right now, and the only reason that you're listening to this podcast right now from me, is because of a KTM 300 XCW. It was a 2012. It changed my life. And it is a viable option for riders. It is my last option for a brand new rider, but it is something that a lot of people are going to start on and going to cut their teeth on. And so just be careful with it. There's so much power there. The nice thing about a 300 two-stroke versus, say, like a 450 four-stroke is it doesn't have so much power that it's just going to kill you. It's got a lot of power, but it's not like it's not like a total deal breaker on that. So anyway, that's my list. To recap, the trail-oriented bikes, I gave the Honda CRF 250X, the Yamaha WR250F. Those are both four-strokes. And then I give the Beta Xtrainer. It's a 300 two-stroke. For the more race-oriented bikes, I've got the Yamaha YZ125. It's a two-stroke. The KTM 150 or 200. Those are two-strokes. I would prefer the two-stroke, the 200 on those. Also, I talked about the Beta 200RR. It's a two-stroke. I highly recommend that bike. Then we moved into 3 4-strokes. I've got the Yamaha YZ250FX, 4-stroke, the KTM 250XCF, 4-stroke. I think that's probably the hardest bike on this list. The Beta 390RR, it's probably it is the easiest and most forgiving of the race-oriented 4-strokes. And then lastly, rounded up with the KTM 300 XCW. Those are the bikes that I think are really, really good bikes for you to start out in off-road dirt biking. So don't make the mistake of getting too much power. That will get you into trouble. And don't make this mistake of just buying, too much bike. Also, you can go out there and you can get a used bike. You can buy a new bike. One thing that people need to keep in mind, a lot of people would ask me every time, like, how do you buy a new bike every year? Well, the first bike is the hardest one. So if you want to go out there and you want to buy a new bike, check this out. It's going to cost you, let's just say it's $10,000. You've got to figure out a way to get $10,000. But then after you get $10,000, if you can save $150 a month and put it in a mason jar, put it in a bank account, put it under your mattress somewhere, in 1 year you'll have enough, or 1.5 years, you'll have enough to make up the gap on the next bike. Because just quick math here, you'll buy the first one for 10 grand, you'll sell it a year later for 8 grand, or maybe $7,500. You're going to have that money in that mason jar or that bank account. You put between $100 and $200 away into your dirt bike fund every month. And then next year, when you go to upgrade to that new bike, you've already got all of the money that you need. And that's how I did it. That's how I have done this. Is the first bike is the hardest one. And then you just keep doing a side hustle. You keep doing whatever you can do, and you put that money away every month. And then you can buy a new bike every year based off the money you get out of your bike, your used bike that is now used, and the money that's in your mason jar. So that's how you can get a new bike every year. I hope you guys enjoy these podcasts. If you have not yet rated us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or whatever, please go and leave a rating for that. And I would appreciate that a ton. If you want to win a new dirt bike, you can go over to dirtbikechannel.com right now, because I've got dirt bikes up there for I'm going to give two dirt bikes for Christmas. So go over to dirtbikechannel.com before December 15th of this year, 2019. Okay, that's all I've got for you guys. We'll catch you later.